I wanted to start by making 4 definitive statements. That's a scary word, but you'll understand. I think you'll see me in these statements, maybe, likely, and you'll see aspects of what I'm going to talk about, and probably you'll see aspects of things that you're thinking that might derive from these statements. So here they are. The first definitive statement is that I identify with the earth because that's what I am. Right out of that, it seems to me to make perfect sense that I'm a landscape painter. Now, I'm also Catholic. 17 years of formal education, culminating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Notre Dame. Then I spent 40 years in Minnesota working with Benedictine sisters and Benedictine monks in 2 liberal arts colleges that they ran cooperatively, College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. So I've got quite an extensive background there. In some cases it's been helpful to me, other cases it's been a difficulty. The 4th statement I want to read because it's a little bit complex, but I want to get it right because I think you're going to get a chuckle occasionally. My ancestors are Northern Europeans of German lineage. These roots, for me, are the filters through which I see the world. I share many of the characteristics attributed to German people, such as a kind of stubborn tenacity. I put that into very genteel terms. Others might use other words a little harsher. Stubborn tenacity. Self-criticism. I'm a very critical person, and I try to be that of myself before I am of anyone else. I have a sense of right-making. It's important to me to try to do whatever preparation is necessary to do the job properly, well, professionally, whatever it might be. And I think I also have a sense of romantic idealism. Okay. That's just a little professorial bit of information you can do with whatever seems appropriate as the evening unfolds. Now, as a landscape painter, I'm very conscious about nature, climate, weather, and it interests me how much of Northern Europeans influenced, how much of the personality traits of Northern Europeans, particularly German people as I understand them, have been influenced by nature, by climate. Unlike Italy, where the sun shines almost 360 days out of each year, and unlike Italy, which allows then for people to move outside freely, non-threateningly, and recreate and socialize in the plazas and taverns and outdoor restaurants and so forth. The cold winters of the northern part of the country, of Europe, are much too severe for that kind of levity. They always present a threat to one's safety and sense of well-being. And a result of that, I think, is that over the centuries, people who live in that kind of climate have been driven indoors, obviously, literally inside houses. But I'm thinking even more importantly, driven further into themselves. Okay. An internalization of emotions, I think, takes place in their temperaments. And often it tends to get romanticized and idealized when it is expressed. I hope that you'll see some of these things, if you haven't already, you know, in my work, but I think also if you look at let's say, Flemish or German painting starting in the Renaissance, you'll get a sense, I think, of how terse and delineated their language is. I'm thinking, this is really an aside, I'll try to do this quickly. Just popped into my mind, there was a story that I heard Garrison Keillor tell a few years ago about a couple whose only child had gone off to college. It was the first time that he had been away from home, separated from his parents, the first time that he had been out of the state of Minnesota. And as it got closer and closer to Thanksgiving, when there was going to be the first break, he had planned to come home. The parents got very, very excited. And they had to restrain themselves from going days in advance to get right at the entrance to the, you know, to the ramp that people would be walking down when they debarked the airplane. So they wanted to be the first people. They wanted him to be the first person that came down that they saw, and they were very excited about this. Plane arrived, people began to debark, and sure enough, there he is. And the father could hardly stand the excitement that he was feeling about his son's arrival. And when the son actually came down and they were standing close to each other, the father said, "So you're here now." That, I think, tells you about everything that you need to know about the attitude of Northern Europeans. They're not the most effusive individuals, but it doesn't mean that they don't gush internally. Okay. The closest I ever came to doing a self-portrait is this painting called Monk. I did it in 1956, 57, I guess, when I was a student working with Umberto Romano. And obviously it's not a self-portrait, but it is a portrait, I think, of the kind of values that I was beginning to form and characteristics of what I thought a life worth living ought to be about. And the painting came about in an interesting way too. I was reading a book by Reza and Jacques Maritain called Art and Faith. And the book is about an exchange of letters that they were having with the poet Jean Cocteau, leading him toward his conversion to Catholicism and away from his opiate addictions. And at a certain point, Cocteau says that he was, of all places, at a cocktail party, and he had this strange premonition that there was something significant that was going to happen. And he found himself looking at the front door, and it opened. And he says in a wonderful, wonderful letter, he said, "All I saw was a blood red cross, and I was converted." It's great. Excuse me, I get emotional about this. Well, it turned out it was a Dominican monk who wear white habits and have a red cross on their breasts, a man named Father Charles, who happened to walk through that door. Now, to upgrade into current time, I was at Romano's studio, and at various times over the years that I was there were some other people from Notre Dame that would come out. And one of them was a man named John Stadzinski, who was a very warm, brown kind of guy. I mean, just as gentle and holy a person as you could imagine. And Romano had him pose for us in the costume that you see. Now, in my painting, what interested me, what I wanted to achieve for this image was I wanted a person who wasn't necessarily blind, but at least whose direction was really lifted toward a spiritual life. I wanted that person to have the hands of a worker. I wanted that person to have the feet of someone who wasn't afraid of the earth, could stand solidly, could sit solidly in unshakable kind of ways. And those were the characteristics that I was hoping to achieve for myself, and they were the characteristics that I hoped to impart through this painting. The monk was made a year before I entered the world of responsible adult life. And it was one of 3 paintings that the University of Iowa took for its collections as partial fulfillment of the Master of Fine Arts degree that it was allowing me to study toward. I want to show you these 3 paintings because I think they illustrate the subtle but really wonderful transition that takes place between, say, an advanced student's perceptions of the world and his abilities and the life of a professional artist.
Next slide, yeah. You can just say next. Next, okay. Just say next.
Okay. All right, thank you. Now, part of this move toward a more autonomous adult life was obviously the need to separate myself from Umberto Romano's influence. I admire that man. He was a hero in my life, but I was profoundly affected by his style. It was so easy to emulate, and his personality was so powerful, it was difficult to resist it. Here's a painting that I made in Romano's style. And at the time I made it, I thought that it was pretty exciting. I think it was called Stone Fields. It's about 4 feet by 3 feet high. I didn't, as I say, I remember being very excited about how expressive I felt I was being when I was making this painting. But shortly after that, I can't say now that, I mean, that faded, clearly. I can't say that it's really a bad painting, but it certainly was not and is not a painting that endured. It seems to lack a sense of discovery and to be burdened by a very prescribed stylistic methodology. Then that was all very exciting, you know, because I was learning how my master was doing that, but it didn't last. Now the next slide, please. I had to be back on the university campus and in the graduate painting department, and away from Romano and away from Gloucester and away from plein air painting, in order to make that break and become my own person. So it was very important that I be at the University of Iowa then. I don't see in looking at this painting anything that's contrived or preconceived. On the contrary, I think there's a lot of evidence to show a real search for shapes and for the organization of not just a still life, but also a landscape. Afterward, when I thought about this painting, I thought that it was probably the first time that I really understood what the word organic meant. I mean, lifeful, okay? And how the shapes that one makes, it doesn't matter whether it's in still life or whether it's in landscape or whether it's in figure. The shapes are the same. It's really amazing when you draw or you work, you know, in all three of those different subject areas. I hope you've all had this, the artists in here anyway, have had this experience, you know, it's remarkable. You know, there's something so universalizing about that, you know, so binding of people and cultures, time, doesn't matter. Okay. Could I see the next painting, please? Now, will that sharpen up a little bit? I guess that's good. Okay. Now at Iowa, I began making, let's see, what is the size of this? This is somewhere around 3 feet by 4 feet, I think. And I had spent time looking at the North Italian Renaissance artist Andre Mantegna's painting called Dead Christ. If you don't know it, I'll just briefly describe it. It shows the corpus of this male figure, Jesus Christ, lying on a marble slab, draped with a loincloth, but otherwise nude. And the perspective on him is you are looking at the soles of his feet, straight up his body, toward the top of his head, you know, where the back of his forehead would start to curve and disappear out of visual sight. And I was making this painting because I really wanted to understand something about linear perspective, and particularly that aspect of it called foreshortening. But the painting was boring to me. And I was just looking at it one day, and I thought, well, there's a potential for a nice landscape in this. So I went, you see the tannish, orangish kind of color just below like the blue sky, way up in the center, about maybe 8 or 9 inches down from the top of the painting. Well, that used to be the underplane of the dead Christ's jaw. Okay, what I'm pointing out to you now, if you're looking at me, okay? And then the forehead I mean, the head then would go in foreshortening back further beyond that. And then the body would come forward and you would have the swelling of the rib cage. And then when you get down toward the bottom of the rib cage where the belly would flatten out, there would be a kind of a recession and maybe even a cave, like at least a negative contouring of the form. All of those things, you know, just sort of fit in. And down the thighs on the left side and the right side, and across the hips and through the groin. And you move down to those feet. And I was making this painting in the studio. My professor was Eugene Ludens at the time, and he said, "Where in the world did you ever see a landscape like that?" And I said, if you stood on the Clyde Andrew Bridge and looked up the Annisquam River, that's what you'd see. Now, I still think to this day, in some way, you do. It's not literal, but the spirit of it is there. Another one of those kind of moves into the organic and the experimental. The year 1958 was, without a doubt, the most important year of my life. In the summer of that year, I graduated with my Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of Iowa. In the fall of that year, I got my first full-time teaching job. And in the winter of that year, I got married to Judith Steele, who's in this room, still married to me. Isn't it amazing? Long time now. She's a native of Gloucester. She was also a student of Romano's. That's where we met. I think God was smiling on me that year for this sequence of things to unfold like they did. You know, for example, in that year when I graduated, there were 34 of my colleagues, all of whom were graduating and all of whom were looking for jobs. And for some reason that I still to this day don't understand, I was the only one that got a job offer. In fact, I got 2. The only 2 out of 34 people. And I was not, by any means, the most intelligent or the most successful or the most artistically gifted, by far, absolutely not. But in any event, I took a job at St. John's University in Minnesota, and I told my closest friend about this job at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And we each accepted those positions, and each of us stuck with them for a full 40 years of our lives. Rich, rich, rich life. Okay, the next slide, please. Yeah.
I'm going to point you here. You want to point to it.
Okay.
But it's not working well. No, it's not. Okay, no, we don't.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, here's a painting. It's called Winter Night North. It's about 36 by 30. It's done in 1959. Now, it's not the first Minnesota painting that I made. In fact, I really don't know what the first one was, but it wasn't this, I know that. But it does capture, I think, the essence of the place and the holistic sense of what it means to me to address landscape. And so I show it to you for those reasons. Now, I'm going to describe for you my recollections of the first time I saw the state of Minnesota. I have, I'm convinced, vivid memory of that experience. A friend of mine from the law school, when I asked him if he could possibly drive me up for this job interview, said yes, and so we left Iowa City, I don't know, maybe like 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that, and we drove in a rather cold April night. At various times it was drizzling, at other times it was kind of sleeting, but not too pleasant. But we started our trek up, and we arrived at the southern border of Minnesota right at dawn. And I can remember it seemed to me like I had never in my life come close to seeing any landscape that was as primordial as that landscape appeared. I mean, absolutely, I swear to God that boulders from some earlier ice age were going to erupt out of the ground as I was looking at it, you know? I mean, there's something about it that was just powerful, and I knew that it was going to offer me everything that I wanted. Could I see the next slide? I took the job teaching, and I drove all over the place. And Minnesota in the fall is a wonderful, wonderful experience. It's not at all unlike you know, what we've got going on in, say, Vermont right now. And the college where I taught, St. John's University, is about 4 miles back into a forest of sugar maples and various red oaks and pines of various kinds. And you drive through 4 miles of this forest before you come to that campus. It's quite an exciting and beautiful kind of place. But the schools were about 4 miles distant from each other, St. John's being a little bit further removed than St. Joseph, Minnesota, from the city of St. Cloud. And I used to drive the back roads back and forth because I taught on both campuses. And to give you an idea of how non-plein airist in attitude I was at the time, I couldn't even tell you what time of the day this is. I think it's night, you know, but then, gee, it must have been a very, very brilliantly lit night, because some of that looks like it would even be daylight, you know. It didn't matter. It was just I was just taking it all in and organizing it in whatever expressive, romantic kind of way seemed appropriate to universalize it, to aggrandize it. So there on the left center, you know, is a little 3,000 person town of St. Joseph, Minnesota, with the cornfields all around it along the road. And along the right side of the road there were more fields, but there were also, it was hillier. And there were about 4 smallish lakes that one could see in making that drive. And so the painting really kind of put all of that together. Next slide, please. Now, I said weather and seasons, particularly the season of winter, is something that you never forget. Your life literally could depend on having that kind of an awareness. Tornadoes is another thing that if you ever experience one, you wouldn't forget either. I remember once, just before I made this picture, my son Christopher, who was pretty young then, like the last of our children, and I were out in the backyard of our house, and we were doing some landscape work. And we had the radio on, and the radio announcer was announcing the path of a tornado that was coming. And we got the map out, and we looked at it, and sure enough, that's just a straight line, you know. And two more skips from where he was saying it on the radio would have been right where we were standing. So just about that time, the most amazing thing happened. The sky came down to the level of my knees, you know, and we were literally in dark clouds. Scary. We ran inside the house, took protection there. Unfortunately, that tornado bounced right over us, and it devastated a trailer park 4 miles closer to St. Cloud, to our east. But I wanted to say something about that swirling tumultuousness, the whistling kinds of sounds that you can hear, the impact that it has on how it makes the plowed fields, everything look so ominous. I hope that captured some of that spirit. Next slide, please. Or here, this is called Burning Field, but you know, I would, if I had another chance, I'd retitle it, because that really wasn't what I was about. I think I chose the 3 primary colors for this Focus type painting because those were the colors that I saw in the landscape there, and I wanted to show them at their full intensity so that I could communicate, you know, how powerful and majestic that land was. Next slide. Now, this is a more serious and a complex painting. It's called In the Fields. Made somewhere between 1960 and 63. In this period, there were 2 ideas that became important to understanding my work. They began to appear. One idea was formal, and it has to do with accepting the canvas itself as a flat plane, you know, as an object, as a surface on which I arranged color and shaped in a way that was pleasing. That idea led to the notion of autonomy, which became one of the hallmarks of 20th century American and actually European painting too, by the 1970s, 1980s. And that kind of autonomy was something that was physically separated from the objects. Okay? It was a pure, abstract, non-objective kind of idea. In the Fields is an example of a painting which is almost autonomous. Okay, almost autonomous. Without a horizon line separating ground from sky, down from up, or near from far, the flatness of the plane and the pure formalism of the object would have been emphasized. But I'll tell you, I remember going from starting at the bottom of that canvas and trying to work my way up. It didn't seem like without having the use of shapes and without having the employment of linear perspective, I didn't think I was ever going to find enough things to put down on that picture plane to get me up to the top. You know, it was an unending thing, and yet, if you think about it, all it is, you could go back and look at, say, Duccio's paintings in the early 1300s. You know, before the invention of perspective, that flatness and depth was exactly the way that he went about showing, you know, this kind of stacked space. So it's not a new idea, it just hadn't been exercised and used very often for many, many centuries. So in any event, But this idea was significant. It's one of the things that never, I think it's in every painting that I've made since the making of this one. Right? It's a formal idea that has a lot to do with how I compose and how I perceive objects in space. Could I see the next slide, please? Okay, this is not a very good slide, I'm sorry to say, but it's called Toward the North. And what I think there's enough of it here to recognize that what I'm interested in as my second innovative kind of breakthrough is the idea of environment. And I'm saying that in a holistic sense. I want to be able to take into account everything that one might see and or feel by way of what's there, what's changing, what's happening, how it's evolving. Let me see the next painting because I think I can explain it a little better with this one. Oh my. Why does that look so light? Well, I don't know why it's looking so light, but it didn't look that way when I was practicing at home.
It's holistic.
Well, maybe I can describe it and maybe you can make it out. In a way, it's okay. I had a job. We used to pack a station wagon and then a trailer which we hauled behind it, full of what we needed for the summer, and 4 kids in the back of the station wagon, and we'd truck out to Gloucester every summer. And at the time I was making this painting in the mid-60s, early 60s, we were renting. Huh?
Can you project out?
Oh, sure. You can't hear it now? Okay. We were living at McComsky's place on West Wharf. And I had a job working at the studio restaurant as a bar waiter at nighttime, and also tending to those people on boats that decided that they wanted to stay on their boat and eat. And that was a great job. I worked with Bill Allen, who was a professor of history and a very nice guy. But during the daytime, we'd go to the beach. And I found myself doing various kinds of experiments just to see what kind of phenomena would occur in nature. Well, the experiment that I did here was to do this great no-no of looking directly into the sun. And I did that as long as I could stand it, which was only a matter of a second or two. But then I looked away, and the painting now is about the after image that I saw when I looked away. Okay. So you can see to the left of center perhaps the most intense yellow form, and then to the right of that there's a shadow that part of it overlaps the yellow part, and it becomes very difficult to say whether one is closer than the other in terms of space. And as you begin to look around further on, you'll see that there are more of these circular disc-like forms representing sunspots throughout the whole thing. And then they gradually disappear as you move down into the water area and onto the whitish sand in the immediate foreground. Next painting, please. This one I think will project maybe a little bit better. This painting is called Fiesta RNAC. You know Albert Alcali? You know who he is? An abstract painter that came over here. He looked at this painting and he said, I have one bit of advice for you. He said, wait until you're a very old man before you try to paint the sky. And I thought to myself, boy, you're a full professor at Harvard University, and you had a great and interesting life coming through Europe as a refugee right after the war, but you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, that's my life you're talking about. You're telling me to just put it off for 50 years? No way. So, it's not literal again, but I hope that you'd agree that it captures the spirit of Rocky Neck and the St. Peter's Fiesta. Just the whole gaiety and pleasantness that Rocky Neck provides. There's a detail that's a little lighter at the other extreme, if you want to show the next slide. Will the next slide show?
Next slide.
Very little color other than blue, and the blue was all glazed, you know, layer and layer and layer upon layer to get the kind of subtleties that made it glow. Not this is an exaggerated image. The other picture was much more like it. Okay, next slide, please. In 1964, we moved into an old, relatively smallish house on the outskirts of downtown parts of St. Cloud, Minnesota. And I lost a rather spacious studio that I had and was now living in this, had a studio in the cellar underneath this house. And it was one of these houses that still had about a furnace that was built in about 1910 or 1915, you know, and all I had were this huge boiler that occupied the whole middle of this cellar, and then all of these enormous diameter ducts and pipes and things, you know, moving out from the sides. Out of that whole downstairs cellar, you know, I was able to eke out a studio that was about 5 feet. No, I'm ahead of myself by one picture, excuse me. About 5 feet by 12 feet. And I'll show that to you in a second. I did want to show one other painting in the same, and this is a painting that, in the same vein as the In the Fields and the Fiesta Rocky Neck paintings that we were looking at. This one is called December Thaw, which I began to realize happens somewhere around the 15th or 18th of December every year in Minnesota that I had been there. We have this warming spell, so I made this painting. I happened to be reading Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual in Art at the time I made this picture. And, you know, his book talks a lot about color symbolics, and how color can stand for objects, can stand for temperatures, can really take on environmental character. And that was something that I was trying to achieve in this painting. The warmest color that I could think of at the time was that brown sun that you see there. And it showed off, I think, well against the orange sky, which was also warm, but not nearly as much so, and much more affected by the general atmosphere. The painting was stolen, actually, from my college, and never found out any more about it. I have no idea where it is now. Okay, now could we move on, please? So I'm now in this little cellar space about 5 feet. I built a 2 foot by 12 foot long table, and I had a chair, and I just made biggest, most spatial, global, worldly miniature collages that I could think of. Okay.
Gordon, can we turn the light off sometimes so we can see the painting?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll do it.
Thank you.
that helps, doesn't it, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you for suggesting it. All I have to do now is speak extemporaneously, you know, which right now is okay. This painting I call the Ant's Domain. These were 6 by 9 inches would be the smallest, and the largest would have been 16 by 20. But most of them were, you know, right around 9 to 12 to 14 inches in size. And they were done with if I remember correctly, with India ink black and with a sepia brown. There might have been a couple of different sepia browns. Lots of different kinds of papers, colored magazine illustrations, various kinds of tissue papers with varying degrees of thickness and transparency. So they're multi-layered things, and in good German fashion, I got really into the world that I was making. You'll see a detail a little bit later. Now, the thought that I had at the time was that, you know, I had been looking at the Minnesota landscape for a long time now, and I was getting a pretty good sense of what it looked like on its surface, but I began to wonder what it looked like beneath the surface. You know, if there are dents here, are there protrusions below the surface? You know, are there big washouts? I mean, what would it be like? And so I thought something about, and then in that romantic kind of mode, I said, well, I'm just going to call this the tiniest little creature, the ant. You know, that's his domain. And so I went about making that particular collage. Next slide, please. This one, my recollection was that I wanted to primarily focus on transparencies in relatively high key, that is to say, approximating white and not getting too much darker than a middle value. Again, there's a kind of a division between land and sky in this picture, and this business at the bottom became, when I finished it, it became pretty prominent. Okay, it seemed almost like that's where the eye was really being directed. And so when I looked at it, I thought, what could I call this painting that would suggest that as a place to look? I called it the Dove's Lament, because I saw a mother-like dove leaning over, looking at the agonized underbelly of one of her children. The Dove's Lament. Next slide. Rafe's Chasm. No, not literally, but Rafe's Chasm is a kind of a hard place to see if you approach it from the land, you know. Even when you look at it from the water, it's a little deceptive. And when I look at this painting, at this collage, that large dark shape seems to me to be it, you know, and then up above there's white sky or whatever it might be. But when you look at it more carefully, you find that it's a very large crevice of the rock, you know, with the chasm-like thing that happens to be full of incoming tide, okay, exposing just a little bit of the far side of the chasm, and then moving off into a nondescript background kind of space. So you can see the thing in different degrees of bigness. Okay, different degrees of how much you take in as an all-at-once kind of an experience as opposed to how detailed and perhaps evolving your ultimate experience of the picture might be. Next slide, please. I like this one, but the only thing about it that I really remembered was that it was a problem of it's called Mountain Falls. And it was really just a problem of getting from top to bottom. You know, I don't remember thinking about it in any deeper, more significant way than just getting from the top to the bottom. But I've had many, and I bet you have too, many wonderful experiences where you're in the woods, you know, and you see these kind of cavalcading falls, and it's a fabulous environment, huh? Smells are fresh. Next slide, please. This one is a 16 by 20 collage, and I call it Minnesota Pastoral. And I'm not sure why, but I guess because that dark shape in the lower right corner kind of looked like a cow, and I see more cows in Minnesota than I did out here. And it looks like a Minnesota type of landscape. Let me show you a detail of this, just to give you an idea of how developed these different surfaces were. Could I see the next slide? Now that's a magnification of perhaps a 4 square inch section or a 4 by 5 inch piece of this painting. And some of that is accidental, and then I seize upon the accident and make use of it. Some of it is really, really laboriously constructed.
Can you go back, Gordon, to the previous one so we can see the large one again?
Go back one slide, please. Can you see just below the center where the dark and the white bands meet each other right in the middle? That's the section of the detailing that you were looking at. Down a little bit lower.
Go forward again.
Now there's texture on the surface, but you know, but I mean it's just the thickness of a slip of paper, of tissue paper. So the textures are really invented, you know, magnified. Okay, next. Okay, now this is a theme that I return to, not in terms of series of works, but it's a theme that I like. It's called The Making of a Tide. And I like the bigness of that. I like the cosmic dimensions of that. I like the physics, although I understand nothing about physics. I like the implications, you know, of a tide being made and how it's going to, it's pushing and it's pulling is going to affect the landscape as it develops. As I say, maybe 4 or 5 times I pick up on that theme and just make a single painting. I don't have any of them that I could show you, but I'd make a single painting of the theme because I still enjoy that theme. Next, please. Okay, then now from there, in 1966, under a bit of duress, we left St. John's. And I took a job at Mundelein College in Chicago, Illinois, And we stayed there for 4 years. And in terms of being in the city, it couldn't have been a better time. You know, it was right at the height of the Democratic Convention and the Chicago riots and the Chicago 7 and the Berrigan trials. You know, that whole social upheaval that was going on in our country. And it was the first time now since my first year of teaching, the first time that I didn't have an administrative responsibility. I wasn't chairing the art department. And I had no responsibilities. So I would drive in a carpool with a man who lived close by, and I'd get to school intentionally early before my first class, and I'd go to the cafeteria, and I'd just sit. And the next thing I know, I had all kinds of students who would come over, especially students of color. And I got to know black people, and it was an incredibly rich experience. You know, I grew up in St. Louis, and the black community was completely ghettoized, and any St. Louisan just drove around the perimeter, you know, oftentimes. Well, I don't want to get into it. So I had no contact with the black community at all. And Mundelein College had one of its mission objectives was to educate those people. So I met a lot of them. And we would sit every morning having coffee, you know, and then 1 or 2 people would come and then another 3 or 4, and, you know, gradually there'd be, every morning there would be a half a dozen to 8 or 12 people that would just be having great conversations about college life and teaching and being students and so forth. It was great. I didn't produce very much. What I did, though, my major interest at the time was an idea that I first found in Jules Olitsky's paintings. Oh my God, it went right out of my head. I have to have a light on for a second here.
Yep.
Sorry, I can't find it. Just looking for the name of it.
Okay.
That's,
No, we went to the Jones.
yeah, Chicago. Okay, here.
Whales of Reality?
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you. Yeah, Olitsky, at least he's the only one that I had seen, was talking about the idea of the veils of reality. You know, that I had a show at Mundelein of Craypaws on that subject matter, and if you saw the most recent exhibit that was here, that notion is still very, very much alive, very much a part of my current thinking. Here in Chicago, I became aware a lot more of the galleries and contemporary theories, and so I was influenced a lot by minimalist thinking. And here are some kind of meditative drawings that I made on the idea of veils of reality, that you move and as you gain an insight perhaps, and a veil is lifted and you see something that had been hidden. That simple kind of an idea. But these were all done with H pencils, you know, the hardest pencil lead that you could find. And they were like spiritual meditations. I would sit cross-legged in Buddha kind of style in a living room of our little townhouse in Chicago. I didn't have a studio. And just make these drawings. Could I see the next one? Next one, please. Very subtle forms that float in, float out. I made probably 24 of these, and unfortunately, my dear friend and colleague back at St. Benedict's said to me in preparation for a show, she said, why don't you let me dry mount those for you? And I said, well, that would be wonderful. She bubbled every one of them.
Oh.
And then she said, she couldn't, God, I feel sorry. She couldn't face me. So she took a razor blade and she tried to cut slits and paste them down. Well, I had the only show I've ever had of pop art figures in about 3 weeks' time. That was a substitute exhibit for what I had intended to show. Those are all destroyed. Okay, now I got to see the light here. Well, as I said, we had left St. John's under some duress, but the problem was with just one individual, certainly not with the community. We were loved in that community and we loved everybody in it. And so in 1970, I was offered a chance to go back to Minnesota to become the administrator of a very large federal grant in developing an art major under a competency model. And I was working with national figures in that regard. Bloom, for example, with all of the taxonomies that he was working on. And then to chair the newly formed joint art department, the two schools decided that all the way up to the level of provosts, they would unite and function as if they were one school. So we had a continuous shuttle bus service that went back and forth the 4 miles between these two campuses, and students, male or female, could take courses on either campus. And it was an incredibly successful program, and in fact, all of the schools that you find in Western Massachusetts, the Smiths and Welsleys and all of those schools that all have these kind of cooperative programs, they all came and studied our model and adapted it to their needs here. It was a very, very healthy thing for both of those schools to have. Now, I don't know, in a certain way, I guess all of this was intended, because it wasn't really until 2000, 2001, when we settled here in Gloucester in our current home, that I really began to do serious painting. That move away and that focus at Mundelein on really teaching and being with students just kind of caught on. And I did that a lot when I went back in 1970. We were engaged in design, as I said, the whole curriculum, but a particular program of study for first-year students. We had a team of 7 to 9 faculty from different disciplines who worked together to put out an experiential learning model of work for the first-year students in the general education program. And all those kinds of things really kept me quite occupied. There was this period of 7 years. I mention this because it's really interesting to me. There was a period of 7 years when I never made a single painting. Now, I could not do it. I tried one, and I just could not do it. But the most remarkable thing is, I bet I made 1,000, if not 2,000, 3,000 paintings in my head. And when I did go back to paint, I think I was considerably better. You know, I mean, even though there's no physical evidence to support that at all, it was a marvelous, marvelous thing to make these detailed mental paintings. Okay, could I see the next slide? Yeah. Okay. All right, get a look at that. I'm going to have to turn the light on for just a second until I get a gist of this. I want to talk about three ideas. This is a painting of Brace Cove that I made in 1980. And the kind of things that I'm going to talk about are not really predetermined. Not predetermined, you know. I start working, these things appear, I recognize them. Then the really important steps happen. I choose to keep them, or I edit them, or I delete them altogether. In a way, I guess I was thinking that there's really no merit or virtue in mindless repetition. The idea that I want to discuss here is the idea of what I call flatness in depth. I talked about it a little bit earlier on when I was talking about environment. When we talked about the possible elimination of the horizon line and really getting into an environment. But I started thinking that that was not the way I experienced space. The world as I know it seems to me to begin at my feet. And from there, I simultaneously look up and back. Okay? Up and back. The world begins at my feet, I look up and back. Now we could turn the light down for a second and see a little bit better. Now, an interesting thing happens. When you start moving up and back into space, you get closer and closer and closer to the top edge of the canvas. You become more and more aware of the two 90-degree angles that top edge forms with the two sides. Okay? You begin to become more and more aware of what we're calling the picture plane, the canvas itself. And that has a profound impact on the history of modern art, I think. Because painters like Kandinsky, for example, started to work non-objectively. Because they said, it's not just about subject matter, okay? I've got those facts that I have to deal with. And he moved into a non-objective language, ultimately, through a kind of a flow of expressionism, into a pure language of geometry, all right? Really the only language for a non-objective kind of a treatment. So the world, as I know it, begins at my feet, and then I look simultaneously up and back. And if I become aware of the top plane and of the flatness of the picture plane, I fall, in a way, I fall right back down into the foreground again. So spatially, there's a kind of a cyclical movement that's going back and forth. Right? That's implied. but if you look hard enough, you'll see it. Think about it. Okay, next slide, please. So that idea of flatness and depth. This is a painting, again, of Brace Cove. I call it the Shoal. It's about 66 wide by 54 high. It's done in 1980. There are a lot of issues of perceptiveness, of perception, that are involved in this painting. And others, once you start to understand this flatness and depth idea, then I think you start to recognize the abstract underpinnings of any really good composition. Let me go through this with you here, okay? If you look at the shoal, you know what I'm talking about, okay? That spear-like dark brownish form in the upper left, okay? That has a movement. Somebody speak out and tell me, how do you see it moving? Does it move from where does it begin and where does it end? Anybody?
Left to right, a very darting movement.
Okay, it moves from the left to the right, all right? It enters the known world of the picture plane on that left edge, and we see it stops at that point on the right-hand side, huh? All right? Now, you can manipulate things to create all kinds of illusions of volume, of three-dimensionality. If you start to do this, let me push the idea a little bit further. I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to sort of talk out loud, and you come along with me as I talk out loud, okay? We're going to take a little visual trip. I want you to focus in the lower left corner of the painting. Lower left corner. And I want you to gradually move diagonally up to the tip of the shoal. Lower left corner up to the tip of the shoal, and I want you to take in, as you move up, I want you to take in what you're experiencing. When you get to the tip of the shoal, I want you immediately to look at the lower right corner of this painting and tell me where it is in space. Somebody sing out with an answer.
Foreground.
How much?
Right down at your feet.
Okay, it's about as close as it could get, huh? All right. All right, if that's where it is in the lower right-hand corner, where is it in the lower left? Is one of those closer than the other?
Yeah, the right's closer.
Huh?
The right is closer.
The right is closer, yeah. But how can that be? I mean, it's a flat plane, huh? Look, you've got two sets of parallel lines. Two of them are vertical, two of them are horizontal. They meet each other at four corners. The corners are all 90-degree angles. Okay, you've got four perpendiculars. And yet, if you want, just make a little drawing for yourself in the air, in front of your eyes. Okay, just draw as you look from those points that I've talked about. Lower left to the tip of the spear, back down to the lower right, over to the upper, to the lower left, and then up again to the top on the left-hand side. Make a little drawing in the air. And you can even kind of accentuate it for yourself by reaching way back you know, reaching way out in front of you if you're going way, way deep into space. And just see what that shape is.
Yeah, well, it looks to me like you've got raised areas, you've got the very far point, the one lower down, those are both elevations, and then the lower right is another elevation that is close to you. I don't know what, that's the rhythm of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The idea, Gully, is that it's a flat picture plane, but it is so warped, so malleable, you know, that you can manipulate different kinds of perceptions. You can use different perceptual devices to accentuate something that you really think is important, or de-accentuate something that is of secondary importance to you. I'm just about finished with this if you're getting anxious here. Let's see one other. Now this is the idea that I think you'll find in a lot of my painting too, about micro and macro space. And I think it's something that you can see. It's much more difficult to speak, to say out loud, you know, what it is or how you find it. But here's a composition. First of all, I'd say that it's a kind of an all-over composition in that it does not seem to be bounded by the edges of the picture plane. Okay? It seems like it really expands out left and right or top and bottom without any kind of interruption, and yet we are only looking at a certain amount of it. We know that too. But it's not compositionally contained, and it does not have about a real kind of closure. Okay. It's an open-ended thing spatially. Basically, there's a whole series of repeated diagonals that tend to move at approximately 45-degree angles from, say, the lower right upward toward the upper left. It seems that the simpler those diagonal lines are, the faster they move. The more complex they are, the more ponderous they seem to be, the slower they move, or they actually become stationary. Right? There are places where the diagonal varies, and it becomes not really a diagonal dominantly, it becomes a horizontal. And wherever you see those kind of horizontals, there's a suggestion of enclosing an area or accentuating a particular area, okay? For example, the lower right-hand corner, that's accentuated because there's a darker value on the right-hand side of that line, 45-degree angle line going through it, than there is on the left-hand side. It's much lighter over there. But on the other side, you know, you can see a similar kind of a thing happening. And see, that's what I say. It's hard to say. All right, but I don't know whether I'm taking in this boundless beach or whether I'm looking only at a square foot at the bottom of my toes. You know, it could be both. You sense that?
Is it an aerial view or a close-up view?
Saying it's either like an aerial view or a close-up.
Yeah, that's a way of saying it as well. Okay? one more I want to show you.
Oh,
Sometimes a guy does really serendipitous things. And I happen to be one of those people, and when I made this painting, it was really serendipitous. But it illustrates a very important feeling that I have about landscape, and it's a good place to stop because it's really where we started. We get some kind of closure. I saw, you know, I've painted, some of you might know, I've painted tidal pools a lot. And I've always found them to be my cathedrals, you know. There's a magic about tidal pools that if you just spend time looking into them, you'll be transported and marvelously rewarded. But I thought about the seaweed, and I thought, what a great metaphor for life that seaweed is. And more specifically, so I made this painting. This painting is, I don't know, about 9 feet by 7 feet or something like that. You remember the painting I had of the still life with the banana on the glass in my show? You know, where I did all of the underpainting and then all of the subtle glazing, layer over layer over layer. I did that in this painting. It took me a year of concentrated work, you know, to make that painting. And the whole point of it is this metaphor idea. Here are these waves that smash in to that pure defenseless still, that seaweed, you know. It's just hanging there. It's supporting all kinds of life. And these aggressive waves smash into it. And it just does its thing, you know. It just lets the wave dissipate its energy. And as the wave moves back out to sea, the seaweed does a dance on the surface of the water. I thought, boy, what a wonderful example of anger management we got there. Terrific. There's a detail of that too. We can see that. Okay, well, I think let's just stop it there. It's about as good a place of getting a circuit. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that, really. I hope you learned something from it. And maybe there are people that have questions or comments that they want to make, but is it possible to get some more light in the room?
Sure. Yep. Or you want some more? Yeah, go ahead.
Gordon, I purchased one of your paintings from the show that you just had, and I just like some information about it. I think it was called Spring Thaw.
Spring Thaw?
Spring Thaw, yeah. It was over in that corner. There was a series
Got the
of
pictures right available.
landscapes. It's a
Can you bring it up?
landscape.
Where was it hanging in the
It was
room?
in that corner where all those
Oh.
vowels are. This was my intestines tank.
I can't place it right now. Is that something that you could find, Jill?
It would be on your laptop.
Oh, okay. All right.
I was just wondering.
Talk to me about it while she's looking.
I was just wondering, it's greens and blues. Spring Thaw, and.
Oh, a little painting that was
Yes,
hanging there
yes.
that's sold.
Yeah, I bought it.
Oh, you bought it? Well, good for you. I wondered who that woman was. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Okay. I was just wondering what period of time were you painting that motif?
Okay, that comes into a series. Les, that's okay. Let's.
Okay, just talk that way.
That comes into a series known as the Celestial Island series,
Okay.
and that was a body of work that I made in which I was trying to extol the absolute splendor, beauty of our coastal landscape. And I imagined that I was on another planet, and I was looking down on this planet Earth, and recording various kinds of things. Les Bartlett, I invited to come and graciously consented to say a little bit about that series of paintings, and I'd like him, if he would, to take over for just a short period, because I think he has an you know, sometimes the artist is the worst person in the world to interpret the meaning of something. You know, it takes another more distant mind with a greater psychic distance in order to see. Well, I think it's that way here, because I've heard Les talk about this series occasionally, and I think, yeah, you know, and I heard what I say, you know, and I don't see the connection, okay? And so I'm still looking to hear. He's got I think, a vision which is as large as mine was, as if from another planet. But it's in terms of the history of Gloucester or Cape Ann, it involves Charles Olson and I mean all kinds of stuff.
So Gordon, what's this 5 minutes? I'm going to hold myself to that, okay? I've known Gordon for over a decade, Gordon and Judith for over a decade. I met Gordon to his website and nearly tore my hair out because there was this painter saying, why can't these values be on a computer screen, all right? And then I saw Celestial Island series. And the hair stood up on the back of my arm. So I knew that there was something that was significant for me to connect to for really the rest of my life. And we've had a lot of conversations. So I'm going to talk to Gordon while I'm talking to you. So there's a new anecdote to bring to you on this, which is in the 1600s, when Francis Higginson comes from England. All right? In his diary, they're a mile offshore from Sandy Bay, and they smell something sweet. And they look and they see nothing, and they get within a half a mile of the land, and as they're looking at the land, the bay is filled with yellow flowers. Well, that has stuck in my mind, because Celestial Island, for me, it's not about a taking from Cape Ann. You're giving back to Cape Ann. And as you said when you were out in Minnesota and the sky came down to your knees, I look at these, swipe to the next image. I look at these and I realize the sky has been this atmosphere. It's not an aerial view. I know that you were not in a plane to see these. If you're on the Pier Bridge, you have to be in a rubber trampoline to go up into the veil of heavens. And so in this, it is that the sky has come up to your knees. I know that in one conversation, I quoted from a Babylonian Sumeric myth of that every sky and every image comes out of the ground. And so as you've talked tonight, it's been such a sense of gratitude to hear your connection to the earth and to the ground. Because here, all of these, swipe another one. There is another one. I want to get to, yeah. There is nothing formative. There is none of the accustomed art forms that we walk around and see or attempt to emulate or dismiss. It is this geology, it's this physics, next one, that is pre-mapped. It's a mapping of such a primitive, and what you're introducing into it. When you talk about the flatness and starting down and moving up into the back, it's an arc of time. Okay? It is a celestial arc. Next one. And I think it's unique. You know, when I walked into you at your show here, you were sitting with one of the pieces. I'll have to get the image. I forget. The next one? Yeah. Keep going. It's the last one. Yeah, yeah. And that's okay. And you were sitting with a blue shirt and a red carnation. May not have been this one, maybe just one. And I photographed you. I immediately took that image because you were part of the campus. So,
Like a Bobby Van song or something.
what?
It sounds like a Bobby Van song.
Well, but you know what it is though? When you're talking about the picture frames, these do not exist within the four-corner frame. Okay, these could be as small as this, or as big as the heavens. That's about all I have to say, except that I've insisted, this is a giving back to Cape Ann. It's to connect with Olson. It is,
You talk about polis.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it is the ringing of the single foot that Maximus puts down. And with that foot down, that reverberation goes all the way from Roman times up through now and into the future. And that is what this series gives to me of you. It's not formative, it's preformed.
Gee, I hope that was okay, Les.
Oh, it is. That's all I have to say, so I say thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Listen out, huh? Last chance.
What's your next painting?
Huh?
What's your next painting?
What's your next painting?
My next painting, you know, for the first time in my life, I don't have one in my mind. I don't have a direction. I don't have a plan. I don't know what's going to happen. Very unnerving.
Stick your brush into the cat red
You know
first.
what I'm going to do? I'm pretty sure I'm going to start drawing. I think that's a good thing to do, start drawing. So, better not get,
Goody.
I've got to get a little stronger before I can
Thank
do
you,
that.
everybody.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you all very much. I hope you did enjoy it.
Can they go now?
Good job.